Welcome to this brief screencast on debugging React and Meteor. What I want to focus on in this screencast is the difference between default import and named import. Okay, and we're using Meteor application template React for this. This is the list stuff page. You can see it right here. And what you can see here is that we have one import with these curly braces around it, and the next import doesn't have the curly braces around it. And unfortunately, it turns out that it's really important that you use curly braces when you need to use curly braces and no curly braces when you don't need to use curly braces. This is not just some kind of syntactic sugar that is random. This is really meaningful. If you don't get it right, your application doesn't work. So I want to spend a couple minutes and explain what this means and what happens when you get it wrong, so that when and if you have this problem in your own code, it can happen to anybody, you'll be able to debug your way out of it quickly. Okay, so the first thing is, let's look at named imports, which are the ones that you're going to see most often. And if we look at the stuff file, okay, in the API, what you can see is that we're exporting two symbols. We're exporting the stuff symbol and the stuff schema symbol, and we use this syntax to say we're exporting it. Okay, so that, and that's because we have two things from this particular file that we want to have clients be able to access. Okay, since there's more than one thing you want to access, you should have a name so that people can, just figure out what they want to access. And so when you do an import, you're going to use curly braces. So in list stuff, you can see we want the stuffs object. We don't need the stuff schema object. And so we say import stuffs with these curly braces. Okay, so that's the indication that to the system that we want to go and find that particular symbol which is being exported from this file, okay, and use that. Okay, now wait, the very next line, no curly braces. What does that mean? Okay, let's look at stuff item. In stuff item, what you can see when you look at the export statement is you see export default, okay, and there's no symbol here. This is just a function call that's going to return an object. So basically, we have this object being exported from the package, but we haven't given it a name. We've not, said const or, function or class or anything like that. Okay, so that's an example of a default export, and you can see it's the only thing being exported from this package. And with the React components, if you look through them, you're going to see they're all export defaults. Okay, and what that means is when you want to import those, you can't use the curly braces. Okay, you have to have, because you're trying to say, the curly braces say look for this particular name and give it to us. The lack of curly braces says whatever that default exported thing is, assign it to this particular name. Okay, the lack of the curly braces says to the system, look for the default thing and import that. Okay, so when we do this correctly, what we get on the list stuff page is no errors in the console, and we get our list stuff page working just the way we want to. Let's see what happens when we mess up. Okay, so for example, let's say we forgot that this was a default export, and we said stuff item as a named import. Okay, save that out, go over to list stuff, and whoops, the page does not display, and we get this error message. And the key thing here, which is really awesome, that you should look for, is in the error message itself. It says, you might have mixed up default and named imports. Bam, it's telling you exactly what you want to go look for, okay? And check the render method of list stuff. All right, so we'll go back here. This is the render method of list stuff, which is referencing. I'm not sure whether it's exactly referencing the stuffs object itself. Well, yeah, it's referencing the stuffs object right here. But the more important thing is the fact that the error message says you might have mixed up named and default imports, which is exactly what we did. Okay, so we go up here and we look at these things carefully and we say, wait a second, stuff item, is that a named export? No, it's a default export. So therefore, we go to list item and we say, no, that should be a default import. Okay, and then we save it out, we go back over, and bang, everything's cool again. Okay, so let's look at the opposite. Let's say, hey, we have this stuffs that's it was a named export, so we have to do a named import. What happens if we just go, forget or mess up and use the default syntax? Save that out. Let's see what happens now. Okay. Unfortunately, what happens now in my environment is we unfortunately don't get an error message that tells us, hey man, you mixed up your default imports. Instead, we get this message that says stuffs.find is not a function. Okay, and so you look at your code and you go, well, of course stuffs is a function. Of course stuffs is supposed to be a collection. I'm importing it right here. That so far looks good to me. What the heck's going on? Okay, well, one thing you can do in this case is you could do, like, say, a console.log stuffs to say, well, what is this object that that doesn't have a find method? Okay, and so if we save that and go back to here, okay, we can go to the console. Well, maybe we have to refresh. Okay. We get the same message, obviously, because we haven't fixed it yet. But what we can see here is that stuffs is actually bound to an object, all right, not to an actual collection. In fact, it's bound to an object whose first element is a collection, okay? And so what's apparently happening here when you use the default import on a named file is what it's going to do is it's just going to say, okay, I'm going to return you a collection with all this junk in it. All right. So it's a little bit trickier to diagnose in this case, but hopefully, having seen this video, you'll now say, okay, if I'm debugging and obviously there's no find function on objects, and you look at this, hopefully this will be enough to clue you in that what you actually did wrong is you used default import when it should have been a named import. Okay, so if I go back and I edit, make it a named import and go back to here again, and refresh because we got stuck in the debugger, everything looks good, and in fact we get this console.log printed out again. So let's get rid of that just to bring us back to standard style. Okay, so there you have it. It's a little lesson on debugging Meteor and React when you are not using the import statement correctly. Specifically, you're using a default when you should have used a name import, or using a named import when you should have used default.